Hey guys, tonight we're talking about revenge. Medieval revenge specifically, the kind that didn't involve deep breaths, forgiveness, journaling, or being the bigger person. The kind that involved waiting 20 years, memorizing family trees, and ruining someone's bloodline with paperwork. So before we begin, lower the lights, put the phone face down, let your shoulders drop a little. You don't need to remember all of this. History will remember it for you. Now, let's drift into it. Revenge in the medieval world was rarely fast. Movies have lied to you about that. It wasn't usually a single duel at sunset or a dramatic final speech. It was slow, administrative, petty in ways that aged extremely well. And that brings us, gently, to a man who absolutely did not start his story as a confident king. Robert the Bruce. Robert did not begin his revenge arc standing tall on a battlefield. He began it hiding in caves, sleeping badly, losing friends at a pace that suggested the universe was unsettled about its opinions. His claim to the Scottish throne collapsed so quickly it barely had time to embarrass itself. Allies vanished, supporters were executed, enemies multiplied. At one point, Robert was reduced to running for his life, which is not how kings usually imagine their career trajectory. Most people at this stage would have panicked, or surrendered, or written a very sad medieval poem. Robert did none of those things. Instead, he waited, not dramatically, not with brooding speeches or sword-cleaning montages. He waited in the deeply inconvenient sense. Hiding, watching, remembering names, mentally filing away grudges like an extremely patient accountant. This waiting was not heroic. It was cold. It was uncomfortable. He trusted almost no one and had plenty of time alone to replay every bad decision he had ever made. But that time taught him something important. Medieval power was fragile. Men who swore loyalty today would abandon you tomorrow if the political weather shifted even slightly. Kingship, he learned, was mostly about timing. And not dying long enough for circumstances to improve. Years passed. His enemies relaxed. They assumed he was finished. Medieval society loved nothing more than a fallen man who stayed fallen. Robert refused to cooperate with that expectation. When he returned, he did not announce revenge. He did not give speeches. He simply started winning, quietly, one fortress at a time. One alliance at a time. No drama, just steady progress that made his enemies increasingly uncomfortable. Then came Bannockburn. On paper, Robert should have lost badly. The English army was larger, better equipped, and extremely confident. Unfortunately for them, confidence is not armor. Robert used terrain, preparation, and a memory sharpened by years of humiliation. The victory shattered English control in Scotland and crowned him king. And here's the important part. His revenge was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was administrative. The men who mocked him lived long enough to see him succeed. And in medieval terms, that was far worse than dying quickly. Robert the Bruce did not rush revenge. He let it mature like a fine medieval grievance. Now let's float, slowly, over to someone who chose an even more unsettling strategy. Matilda of Tuscany. Matilda did not take revenge with swords, or poison, or dramatic battlefield speeches. She chose something far more devastating. She simply refused to die. In medieval Europe, this was an aggressive move. Matilda was one of the most powerful women of her time, which immediately meant that emperors, popes, and rival nobles spent decades trying to sideline her, ignore her, marry her off, or quietly wait for her to disappear from history like so many inconvenient women before her. They assumed time would solve the problem. Time, unfortunately for them, was not on their side. She was insulted, undermined, openly challenged by men who believed power belonged to them by default. Some tried to take her lands. Others questioned her authority. A few assumed she was merely holding power temporarily until a proper ruler arrived. Matilda listened politely. Then she waited, and waited. While emperors declared her irrelevant, she governed. While rivals plotted, she formed alliances. While enemies aged, fell ill, or died dramatically of medieval causes like bad water or too much ambition. Matilda stayed exactly where she was. Running things. Quietly. Competently. Annoyingly. Her revenge was subtle but brutal. She watched her enemies exhaust themselves. She watched political tides shift. She watched successors inherit grudges without inheriting the competence required to act on them. One by one, the men who tried to control her vanished from the board. Some through death, others through irrelevance, which, in medieval society, was arguably worse. There was no final confrontation. No climactic battle, just an uncomfortable realization spreading across Europe that Matilda was still there. Still powerful, still very much in charge. Eventually, even her enemies stopped fighting her and started negotiating with her instead. Which is the medieval equivalent of admitting defeat without apologizing. This kind of revenge drove people insane. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't outlaw it. You couldn't even complain without admitting failure. Matilda didn't destroy her enemies. She outlasted them. And in medieval politics, that was the coldest revenge of all. Now, let's drift into a very different kind of revenge. William Wallace. Wallace's revenge story is unusual because it did not end when he did. In fact, his enemies would probably argue it became significantly worse afterward. Wallace did not start as a grand noble. No vast estates. No ancient titles. He started as a man who watched his family murdered, his homeland humiliated, and English officials behave as if Scotland were an inconvenient detail. His response was not subtle. He did not negotiate. He did not write letters. He chose violence immediately, and enthusiastically. Wallace attacked symbols of English authority wherever he could find them. Sheriffs, garrisons, tax collectors. If it represented control, it became a target. His victories were loud, embarrassing, deeply irritating. This was not revenge delivered with elegance. This was revenge delivered with a large sword and very little patience. Eventually, medieval reality caught up with him. Wallace was betrayed, captured, executed in a public spectacle designed to erase him completely. England assumed that would be the end of the problem. Medieval governments loved that assumption. It was wrong. Instead of killing the rebellion, Wallace's execution transformed him into something far more dangerous. As symbol, his death did not frighten Scotland into submission. It irritated them deeply. His story spread, exaggerated, polished, repeated, until Wallace became impossible to ignore. Every rebellion that followed carried his name like a banner. England didn't just have to deal with armies. They had to deal with memory. And memory, unlike a man, cannot be executed, quartered, or displayed on city gates. Wallace never lived to see Scotland free. He never enjoyed comfort or safety. But his revenge worked anyway. His enemies spent decades fighting a ghost they had created themselves. William Wallace did not win by surviving. He won by refusing to disappear. And that kind of revenge keeps rulers awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering which mistakes history will refuse to forgive. And that brings us, gently, to someone who understood revenge as a long marriage. Eleanor of Aquitaine, but we'll let her wait a little. Because medieval revenge, like the people who practiced it, always preferred patience.